So we continue our interview series with another episode in virtual space. It's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Pravin Sinha, who is an emeritus professor of political economy at the Center for Labor Studies at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences in Mumbai, India. He is also the honorary president of the National Labor Law Association and Secretary General of the Indian Industrial Relations Association, as also of the Social Security Association of India. In today's episode, we will be discussing topics covered in the working paper he wrote, The Informal Economy and the Collective Cooperation in India, Lessons from Ela Bhatt. But before we start discussing the paper you wrote, Pravin, I would like to invite you to say a few words about your current research projects and in general, what have you been doing in the last period?
Okay, Alex, thank you very much. And I'm glad that I'm part of this ICDD series, because I find that this series has more wider reach. And as such, the working paper I wrote, and also the others who wrote and who got the opportunities to be interviewed on this series, I think the ideas will go to a much wider audience, and as such it is I find that this media that ICDD has started is an interesting development, and I'm glad to be a part of this initiative. Insofar these 2 years has been, and this continues to be so, it has been challenging year, not only for all the countries of the world, but also India, which was a major impacted party insofar the COVID was concerned. And in the absence of the required vaccine availability, and also in the absence of insufficient supply of life-saving machines and other things, we found that there was a large number of life lost, and majority of them were those who came from socio-economically lower group, which includes the workers, the migrant workers. In fact, those were the ones who got impacted most, because following the onset of COVID, the government took decision with regard to restriction movement of public by stopping air and road transport, railways also, and also restricting the operation of the business, which was the primary source of livelihood for majority of the worker. And as such, this was the most challenging time for migrant worker, for those workers who are not regular, but even for those who are regular workers, they were faced with a challenging time, because many a time we found that the employers did not fulfill their side of the promise, which was stated in the various laws. And somehow the government directives were so sudden that neither the employer nor the workers got the opportunities to adjust itself. It goes without saying that the COVID pandemic was a development which neither the government nor the employer nor the trade unions were prepared for it. And as such, everybody was trying to move in the air to trying to sort out the problem, and as such it created. So that was one area that really remained in the minds of my academic work. So there are 3 specific areas that I dealt upon, Alex, in the last 2 years. One was, of course, looking at the trade union movement in the context of the changes that are taking place following the COVID crisis, the digitalization, the work from home, the fixed term work, and the government various directive increasing the hours of work, and also violating other provisions of the ILO, including the core conventions. So as such, we found that these 2 years has been very challenging for the trade union functionaries, for those who are involved in the world of work and trying to represent the interest of worker. So that will be my that has been my first area of research, and I'm in the middle of it, trying to reshape, trying to propose reshaping of trade union. And that has a background that for the last 1 century, or since 1926, when Indian trade union was formally recognized, you found that in the last 100 years, there has been various instruments which were guiding, controlling that functioning of trade union, which somehow did not really went into the benefit of the larger section of people. And why I'm saying is that because the informal economy and the informal worker constituted about 90% or 88% of the workforce. And unfortunately, the women worker form the majority portion of these workers who are most of them are undocumented worker, and as such deprived of all the rights and privileges that are available under law. So that is one area that I'm working on and trying to suggest the trade union movement to kind of refocus their work. I'm sure that won't be an easy task, seeing the situation in South Asia, but that is one area that I'm working on, and I have had some consultation with the trade union functionaries in India to see that how do we proceed. So there is some kind of consensus building insofar the research is concerned. Another topic that has been of debate in the last 2 years has been with regard to labor law reform. And the labor law reform has been on the agenda of both trade union, employer, and the government ever since 1947, when India became independent, and more specifically after 1952. Everybody wanted a change in the law, but nobody agreed what should be the change. And as such, there has been always debate with regard to what form of reform should be undertaken, because many a time there was a feeling, whether it's an employer or the trade union, there was a feeling that if we go for reform, they might lose the existing rights and privileges that they have, whether in the form of taking uniform decision as to how to invest capital, or the trade union with regard to collective bargaining power or other things. India has already enacted 4 codes by merging 44 odd laws, national laws. And that is not enough, because we have 165 state laws and about 5,000 judicial judgment by the Supreme Court, which have the same status as the law. And as such, the legal scenario of Indian trade union movement and Indian world of work is rather complicated. Still, in the last 2 years, specifically last year, the central government went on and passed the 4 codes, which has so far not been accepted. There is strong resentment from the trade union, fearing that they will lose their hard-earned rights. My proposed study is with regard to taking this change from professional point of view, seeing that, all right, if it is wrong, from where it is wrong, rather taking a political stand that, okay, because it is done by ABC, I do not agree. There has, in the last year or two, I have had more than 50 consultations on this subject by representative trade union, whether looking at the social security, looking at the minimum wages, we are looking at occupational health and safety, or looking at the employer-employee relation in the context of the new law came. Try to find out what could be the possible meeting point in which what government has suggested and what is acceptable to the bodies of employer and the workmen. So that is another area. I'm still working on it. And like I said, Alex, it is not easy to bring consensus among the. And the third area which has required more than South Asia attention is the farmer strike that was in India. And that is, I'm examining farmer strike from the point of view is what are the lessons for the trade unions? Because there are three factors which are very relevant to what a farmer strike was and the situation that we are in and how the trade unions are operating. One, the unions of the farmers, which got affiliated into one larger union, this larger federation, but that remains an informal economy. Agriculture remains an informal economy. We find that there was a strong opposition from the government with regard to not accepting their demand for withdrawing the 3 laws that the government has enacted. They said that this is not acceptable. It goes against the interests of farmer and those working therein. And the government had its own interest. However, they continued to strike, and for 1 year, they were surrounding Delhi. And eventually, there was some kind of agreement between the national government and the union, and the government decided to withdraw the law. Now, what I'm trying to focus there is that how come the farmers' strikes succeeded and the trade union, strike by trade union, industrial workers union, has not succeeded in achieving their desired goal. So that I'm trying to make a comparison to draw lessons, whether there is a trade lessons for trade union and whether the trade union would like to see that one. So these are the three primary areas at the moment I'm engaged. But again, my teaching at the Tata Institute quite occupies me there. So as such, the new issue comes from the students, from me, and so it's quite interesting. Yeah.
Pravin, it seems that you have really a lot on your hands and also a lot of topics that you're occupied with these days. And something you mentioned actually also brings me back then to what I read in the paper that you wrote. And this is that, so India has one of the largest trade union movements in the world, basically. So, or the largest membership base, so to say. Yet this trade union movement is failing to integrate the informal workers and is predominantly based on the informal sector. And basically what the question, I mean, I think this question goes a bit into the direction of what you were saying about the farmers' strike and their success. And on the other hand, maybe the failure of the trade union movement of India, basically to have the same success in their negotiations. So would you maybe like to say a bit more about this? And also perhaps reflect on the fact that the membership base in the traditional trade union movement is predominantly male-based. So we do not have women, as you that you said, basically occupy a very significant chunk in the informal economy in India.
I think it will be nice if we look at this issue in the context of the social condition that prevails, not only in India, but other South Asian countries. India, although 70 years of independence we have achieved, it's 1947 became independent, and over the 70 years we have made remarkable progress, economic and others. But on social side, we find that to bring about social change is not as easy as in the case of manufacturing sector or industrial sector. So there has been certain level of biasness in the social system insofar and the status of women is concerned. And you find that somehow that percolates into the whether we look at the world of work or whether we look at how the wealth, family wealth moves from one generation to another generation. Of course, there are some changes coming up, but those are good in paper at the moment. It still has to bring to reality in the form of everybody expecting the same. Two issues that I want to share with you, Alex, is one, we look into the history of Indian trade union movement. The trade union movement did not come as a movement of class struggle, right? It was more of a political development in India, and those who were involved in the process of independence, they try to integrate the existing labor movement or workers movement into the ongoing independence movement. And the difference between what we look in Europe and what we look in South Asia is that in South Asia, the workers as a class only appear during the factory system. That was when the factories came to this part of the world. Earlier, we had what we call it cottage industry, where the jobbers and they were used to get promoted, and there was limited conflict of interest between those who were training and those who are getting trained, because there are a gradual process of movement from being trained to a job to a skilled worker and then starting one's own business. What happened in the case following the factory system is that a new class developed, and the trade union movement that we practice, primarily it was for political independence, and as such, the motive was to create a contradiction between those who controlled the resources and those who work them. And if you look into the history, you find that most of the workers were the Indians who were part of the colony, and while the colonizers or those who were to colonizers were the owner of capital and also owner of it. So as such, that was the ground when you find that a kind of conflict situation arose, not because of the political ideological difference that was there in the West, or whether it's because of the Bolshevik Revolution or other thing. Here it was because the resources were controlled by one party, and those who were exploited were another party. Mm-hmm. And as such, in the world of work, you find that there was a conflict of interest. The laws that were developed by the colonizers was with the aim to control the workers so that the production does not get impacted. So there are two factors. One, the laws were primarily for the factory, mm-hmm. right? And the laws were created with the interest of capital in mind, those who were controlling the resources. And as such, you find that two things. We find that in the application of the law, the final authority remained in the hands of the capital. And the second was the application of the law was confined to the factory, mm-hmm. which only constituted a smaller portion of the total workforce, total business, because India was and remains primarily an informal economy. And even today, over 90%, I think the latest figure is 97% so, of the business establishment are in the informal sector, undocumented workers. They are not registered establishment. Mm-hmm. Same goes to the workforce. The workforce, whether you call them undocumented worker, whether you call them a casual worker or the contract worker, they do not really have the status of workman, and as such, in the absence of the status of workman, they are deprived of the protection and the right under the law. Mm-hmm. That is the thing. And then you find that in the last 70 years, the trade union, of course, insofar data is concerned, insofar figure is concerned, they have increased the membership. Mm-hmm. But insofar their effectiveness is concerned, effectiveness in securing the rights of the workers are concerned, that remains to be seen in a manner. Mm-hmm. Now, when a figure is quoted, you're talking about India, which is the second most populous country in the world. The workforce is 500 million population. Mm-hmm. So the figure really is daunting when you talk about the size of the workforce. But the real importance is how strong and effectiveness is the trade union. And also, if I if I quote the three principles of Amartya Sen in one of his book, he wrote that in examining an institution, one has to see that what is the reach of an institution, what is the reason for that reach or not reach, and what are the alternative solutions that one can suggest insofar an institution is concerned. And I find this kind of examination is almost absent in all the South Asian countries, including Southeast Asian countries where I have worked to some extent.
But talking about alternatives, Pravin, in the paper that we are discussing, the concept of collective cooperation is not put against, but is kind of juxtaposed to the class conflict that that you've just mentioned, basically, that the movement itself was not based on it. So perhaps it would be good to hear a bit more on the concept of collective cooperation, and also maybe with regards a bit to the historical development, because it's mentioned that the idea of Gandhi's trusteeship is rooted in the idea of classless cooperation. And then this inspired basically policies already in 1958 that have become an integral part of the planned economy in the country. So perhaps you could also say what has been the impact of these cooperatives on the position of informal workers that constitute the largest share of the economy. Yeah.
You see, when India secured independence, at that time, India was a combination of 523 independent states, the independent kingdom, what we call it, princely state. And those were merged with the British India. So you find that India was not when it was created, it was not an harmonious situation. We have over 1,500 languages. We have, I think, a large number of religion and caste structure, and those still remain important in the present day society, in spite of the fact that we are increasingly entering into the digitalized world. Now, when we were trying to get into the mode of becoming an independent country, and Gandhi was the main father of the nation, or main statesman insofar so far giving direction to the independent movement. But incidentally, Gandhi has also worked in South Africa, and also subsequently he was a main representative of employer and also trade union in the textile sector of Ahmedabad in Gujarat. So he had the experience of both, and also he was an active partner of the trade union movement, although he did not become member of the first Central Trade Union, All India Trade Union Congress, because of the perceptual differences. But when we talk about the two instruments, whether we look at the instrument with regard to collective bargaining, the result is collective bargaining, or the second one is collective cooperation. It talks about two different situations. Collective bargaining is more or less focused on the parameter of the factory system, whereas you have 2 or 3 defined interests, and all these interests are trying to get maximum return out of the investment that has been made, and you find that the stronger one takes the all. When Gandhi proposed this thing, he said that his reasoning was that India is a primarily informal economy, where there is very thin line between who is employer and who is workman, and which is more visible in the case of self-employed sector, because the self-employed workman or self-employed enterprise is defined differently in the context of Europe, but in the context of South Asia, you find that the person who is not able to get a job, he becomes a trader, he becomes a street vendor, he becomes a what we call unconnected supplier of services, whether it's a cleaning or whatever the case. And that was the scenario he was looking at. And he says that since the majority of the workers, for the majority of the workers, we do not have employer-employee relation because there is no formal contract of employment. This system of collective bargaining or hang that two interests, employer and workman, and seeing that there is some kind of parity to be achieved has become difficult, because there is so much of gap insofar power at the world of work is concerned. The resources are still controlled by those who are in dominant position, and as such they can influence the policies and program adopted at the company level more than the other ones. And that is the reason why till today the 1948 Act relating to Minimum Wages Act has still not been effectively implemented, which is the basis for either social security or trying to overcome the unemployment problem in a specific country. The Gandhi example was again came from the South Africa and that of Gujarat, but subsequently it was taken over by two persons. One is Ela Bhatt, and second is of course a German F.E. Schumacher. And that was in the background of both reasoning. In his book, I think Small is Beautiful, that's a Schumacher book, Small is Beautiful, and also Gandhi's. Both of them said that India is a country of smaller unit. It's an informal economy, and you have over 600,000 villages. And Gandhi was saying that each village should become independent, so there is not much dependence on the state insofar day-to-day life is concerned. In that context, they said that since labor is a major problem in Asia, in India, the policy and the institution should be focused on employment generation. Larger companies are good insofar the capital is concerned, because there's a multiplier effect is good. It's more economically the machines could be utilized, but it does not generate job. And that has been the case. That has been the reporting of ILO also when they spoke about the ILO's future of work. Now they said that Gandhi said that our main problem is job creation, and for that it is imperative that one, we should have a labor-intensive modes of production, and second, since there is so much gap between rich and poor, we should try to have smaller units so that the return from the business goes to wider section of the population, and as such the distribution is equitable. And this example, this philosophy was adopted by Ela Bhatt in her institution SEWA, where I was connected for quite some time. And there you find the example of both trade union and also cooperative, and how they have jointly worked towards one, trying to get the political right insofar decent work is concerned, at the same time trying to not to create a conflicting relationship between those who control resources or the government policy and the trade union. And as such, you find that when the powers are not equal, in that case, to have a conflicting relationship goes against the interest of the weaker, and that has been the case insofar Indian trade union movement is concerned in the last 70 odd years, and also in the case of South Asia, other countries also.
And Pravin, now that you mentioned the SEWA model, what do you think, what would be, is it realistic to expect, or is it realistic to say that this model could be used then further on, so it becomes a reality for all workers, so to say? Do you think there is a potential in this?
You see, in my 2 decades of working with FES, I give you example. There were a couple of initiatives that we took. One trying to both cooperative and trade union model. And one was with regard to street vendors, right? We examined the situation there, and we find that somehow there was reluctance on the part of policymakers to come to a certain policy decision which will enable the workers, the street vendors, to have the rights that is either defined in the Constitution or in the ILO's conventions. So we started to experiment. One was to have an organization based on the right base and what we call National Hawkers Federation. And the second was based upon economic self-employed model, that is National Alliance of Street Vendors. Now, those both had relevance. Both had relevance insofar the sustainability of experiment is concerned. I, as a researcher, found that there are differential insofar the sustainability of the model is concerned. Insofar right-based model is concerned, there you need a prominent and a dominant leader who could kind of influence the other party to agree to the policy and program that is being suggested, or integrate representative of the street vendors or hawkers in the policy formulation. Mm-hmm. And the other case was that of the street vendor who were also fighting for reducing the precariousness of the condition that prevails among the street vendors, but they had adopted the self-employed model, that they have a small business. From there, they collected the subscription and then come to the negotiation table. Mm-hmm. Independently, if we leave both separate, they were quite active in their respective areas. But insofar getting the government to agree to a specific situation, there was a challenge being faced by both parties. The government announced the national policy, I think, some time back, but then they did not come to the agreement of coming to an act. Eventually, a law came, but that is still to be implemented because the state governments are still reluctant to constitute the vendor committee that is required as the policy making and integrate either cooperative or trade union in that way. So what is the learning in this case? In the learning case is that we are already in a system which is deeply ingrained in the system. We are in a situation where we have institutions available, whether cooperative or the trade union, which are deeply ingrained in our system. And somehow, some of those who are the main player they also have their own self-interest. Mm-hmm. That also plays problems sometimes. But when there is an sustainable effort, more so if you look at countries of the size of India, where you have each state is of the size of a country, the fight is not only at the national level, but national level, once you have a law, it has to be fought more seriously when it goes to the state level. And that requires sustained effort from the functionaries and also the development of the structure at the state and local level, which sometimes I find that the resource constraint come to the trade union and also cooperative sometimes. So that has been the case. Yeah.
Yeah. So Pravin, I think we've covered a lot of ground when it comes to the main concepts mentioned in your paper. But maybe to wrap it up, do you have any positive stories that you would like to share about organizations and movements that inspire you today? I guess in the day and age that we find ourselves in, inspiration is really what we need. And,
oh, yes.
Yeah.
I will just give you a couple of names that that has kind of given initiative to look into the conditions that prevail, especially in the last 2 years, because it has been really horrifying for the workers in the informal sector and specifically their families, the children who were made to move out of the school because the schools are closed and they don't have the electronic instruments to be able to have online education. And also the domestic workers, the rickshaw or the care worker, who suddenly found that they're not welcomed. And they found that they are carrier of all the viruses that are there. So suddenly they lost the job. Of course, the COVID pandemic is now, the virus is of lighter type, if I may say, but at least there is a more willingness of people to come out and be seen in public. But there is still reluctance insofar getting somebody in the house to do day-to-day work. So you find that on one hand there is no social protection, there is no social security, there is the economic packages that the government announced somehow has not reached them. On the other hand, you find that they suddenly are not welcomed anywhere and they don't have any other skills to do the new jobs that are coming up, either as a gig worker or as automated work, or what you call technically qualified worker. Now, there are a few names I would like to put before you, and one is on the basis of the kind of leadership that was given by a person, and that's why the person transformed from being a leader of a society to a community leader. Now, community leader, you can divide the community of workmen or community of women, and that, of course, Ela Bhatt is prominently present, because Ela Bhatt was initially, when she came out of the INTUC, because of certain differences, she started an organization as a functionary, but then eventually graduated to be a community leader. Now she's seen as a person who gives kind of inspiration to the workers to be part of her experiment. And we find that the SEWA is not only now confined to Gujarat or India, but has branches in South Africa and other parts of the world, and is giving kind of guidelines to organizations that are coming from. Another person that was also important, also come to my mind and has influenced my thinking, is Anna Hazare. And Anna Hazare is a person who spearheaded movement against corruption. Single person, right? No political background, no resources. Yet when he started from his village, he said, I will not allow alcohol, I will not allow corruption, other things. And gradually, he got the following and he moved to the central stage, and he led to a creation of a political party which now controls 2 states. So that is the second person I find that has influenced my thinking and working, because both moved from being an individual leader to a community leader, and same goes to Jayaprakash Narayan, J.P. Narayan, who was a trade unionist, and eventually he became a leader which was respected by all employers and employees as well. Now, insofar institution is concerned, I hope we are not running out of time. Insofar institution is concerned, I will still like to examine the Farmers Federation, Sanyukt Kisan Morcha, because not that they did not have differences among themselves, not that the politics was not involved there, yet they remain together and remain united to a specific cause. So that is one thing I would really examine, and I would really want the trade unions to look into it and to see whether there are some seeds that could help the trade union movement, not only in India, but other part of the world, also specifically where you have informal economy in a larger number, and whether that can help in strengthening the trade union movement so as the rights of the worker is achieved to the extent that there prevails not only social justice, also the decent work conditions.
Yeah, this sounds to me, Pravin, like a topic for the next talk that we will schedule once you get more results on this research.
Okay.
Pravin, would you have any words for the end, or do you think we've missed to cover some topics related to the paper or your current work?
I think we have more or less covered the issues there. But yes, economics or the world of work is a dynamic situation. Every day, not only things change, but the relation changes between the players and between the countries. It is also that we are in a rapidly changing environment. It may sound easier for global North to adjust to the technology, to adjust to the flexible work, to adjust to gig work. But in countries like India, where the basic conditionalities are not defined, even the minimum wages are not ensured, there is no social protection, this question of flexibility directly relates one's capacity to earn a livelihood. And when there is a question of livelihood, it becomes important that whatever ILO has defined as a decent work, or at least the core convention, the 8 conventions that are part of the core or fundamental rights convention, and of course the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And the third document that I would like to quote here is that 2011's UN Guidelines for Business and Human Rights. If these 4 documents are put at the focus of both employer and the trade union, I think at least we will be able to have a discussion with informed group. It is important that both groups are fully informed and do not come to a discussion table with preconceived ideas. And as such, there is a reluctance to the question of give and take, and that is the principle behind the cooperative. That there is a give and take both sides, and both sides are willing to give and take with the ultimate objective of seeing that the business survives and economy grows. Yep.
Wonderful. Pravin, thank you so much for finding time to participate in the ICDD Interview Series. It's just been amazing. I've learned a lot, and I really look forward to our next talk.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex, so much. Thank you to you, and thank you to all colleagues at ICDD. And it will be my pleasure to see you again sometime.